give you a quick update about what's going on. Right now, we got the fiberglass all down on the floor. There's going to be a few edge areas that we're still going to need to work on. A couple of spots we got some air bubbles and stuff we have to get rid of, but for the majority of it's all done. So our next step now is to mock up the layout of all the seats and everything. So for that, we're going to put the sides back on. We're going to go ahead and place our console, place our seats, get them where they have to be, mark them out, take the sides off again, and then we're going to go ahead and fiberglass those seats in the console in, and mark out our hatches, all that fun stuff, and then we'll get into fairing. So it's starting to come together now. Of course, the weather outside is not looking really well out here. It's been threatening to rain, so it's actually drizzling right now. So I don't know how much we're actually going to be able to get done, but we'll see what we can do. All right, well, we got them bedded down now. Basically, what we did was we mixed up some resin, some fiberglass strands, and some cabasol just to thicken it up. And we laid a pretty good bed under here because this is pretty wide here. So we got that laid. First thing we did was we set in our chase for the wires and everything. Got that set in. Put this on. Went around, cleaned everything up as best we can. The strands, once they start breaking down in the resin, they become really a mess. But we got that down. We went ahead, and I didn't actually turn the camera for this one. But we went ahead and we got this done too. So you can see we got this whole thing bedded down and set as well. Get some fiberglass on me. We'll look good and we'll let this set up a little bit. Then we're going to come back with a mixture of the air bubbles and resin to do a nice fillet. We'll probably mix in a few strands, not as much as we did this first time. And then we'll go ahead and we'll do our fillets. So we'll get our fillets all the way around both sides. Then we're going to go ahead and use some chop strand, and we'll actually tab this in with the chop strand so that once it's down, we don't want this thing to move. Then we have a few spots on the floor that we still want to go ahead and we're just going to clean up a little bit, and we'll be ready to start fairing this thing in. What you see us doing here is we're actually creating our fillets, and we're using a combination of resin, catalyst, cabasol, and some what they call glass bubbles. The reason you're using the glass bubbles is because they are softer than the cabasol. The cabasol is actually made from silica, which is sand. The sand is the same thing that sandpaper is made out of. So it's like taking two things that are equal hardness, and it doesn't sand as easy. You use a lot more sandpaper, and it is definitely harder to sand. But once you throw those glass bubbles in there, it does make it a little bit easier to sand. The tool that we're using, it's a little plastic putty knife that has a rounded edge, and it's probably a 1/2 inch round. So we're using that to actually create the cove, because you don't want to have any 90-degree edges. The 90-degree edges is what's going to create a lot of problems when you're fiberglassing. That's going to give you spots where air can get into. So by making that rounded, it just lets the fiberglass matting bend better, and you can get the resin in there, and it makes it nice and smooth. So we're using a larger plastic putty knife to scoop out our peanut butter mixture to get into the edge, and then we're going ahead and smoothing it out with that little black plastic putty knife. One of the keys is, when you're doing this, is to get as much of the mess removed. So when you go ahead and use the rounding tool, you'll get a little bit of an edge on the top and the bottom. So you want to go ahead and get that off. That's just less sanding you have to do. And trust me, there is enough sanding that's going to have to be done, that you want to do as little as you can. And we're just smearing around a little bit of the extra, because we're going to have to go over this whole thing and ferret it out anyway. So just by taking that extra, we're not wasting it, pushing it into any of the little holes and stuff that we have there, just from the fiberglass. You want to do this filleting all the way around. So we did it on the inside. Now here we're doing it on the outside. The reason for that is, like I said, it makes that fiberglass matting bend better, just to keep the air out of it. And that's where your strength is. So that's really, we set this down in some bedding material, which is going to help hold it. But what's really going to hold it is going to be that fiberglass matting that we put down. You got to work pretty fast with this stuff, because it's going to set up pretty quick. We were getting, our working time with this was probably about 15 minutes. So about every 15 minutes, anything that's left in that bucket is no good, and we have to go ahead and mix up some more. The mixture we're using here is we were doing about 16 ounces at a time. And what you do is you pour your resin into the bucket, 16 ounces, and then you're going to go ahead and add some Cabasol and add the glass beads to make it so it's thicker, like a peanut butter consistency. And then we go ahead and we add our catalyst. We don't want to add the catalyst first, because then it's actually starting to fire off while we're mixing. And that just cuts back on our working time. So we went ahead and we mixed everything up. Then we added our catalyst, mixed it again real good. and that's the key, because if you don't mix it real good, you're going to have spots like you seen in one of our last videos where we had some that was nice and hard, and some of it just never cured all the way. We had a lot of filleting to do, and yeah, I'm speeding this up. I'm not actually working that fast, but I was working as fast as I could to get this stuff down. You can see on the console some of that white. That white is where I had actually spread out some fairing compound prior to putting this thing down, because I wanted to get that as smooth as I could as well when I go ahead and put the fiberglass matting on there. Any little gaps is a spot that can create air that you're going to have to push that resin into, so you get good adhesion. So we tried to make everything as smooth as we could. That's why with the seats, you know, we faired those out, and we actually had a coated gel coat on there prior to this. Now it was gel coat. It was waxed. We went ahead and we sanded it all down because, you know, we were trying to get that smooth surface. Now here you'll see we're actually getting ready to put this the fiberglass sheets down. So one thing we found that was real helpful with this is we pre-cut all of our pieces to size first. This way we had everything laid out. We didn't have to take the time to cut it while our resin was catalyzing in the bucket. So we went ahead and we first thing we did is we coated the surface that we were going to put it on, and then we coated each sheet. Then we went ahead and laid those wet sheets up, added some more resin, and by using that's just a regular chip brush. We made sure we pulled all the hairs, loose hairs out of it. But that's just a regular chip brush, and what we're doing is we're actually pushing the resin into the mat so that we can get it fully saturated and get all those air bubbles out. One way to get the air bubbles out is when you see me just pushing down with the brush. That's just pushing the air bubbles out. Now we had to put this matting down everywhere that we had filleted. Prior to putting the matting down, we did go over everything, just sanded it, you know, as lightly as we could to get everything smooth. Because again, the smoother the surface that you're putting the matting on, the better it's going to come out. These chip brushes you can buy pretty cheap, and every time I use it, and once that bucket goes, I have to mix a new one. I throw that chip brush away. Go ahead and get a new chip brush, because they're not even worth cleaning. It would take too much time to even try to clean it. You'd have to use. We found that the xylene worked pretty well, but acetone really works the quickest, and acetone just evaporates very quickly, and it eats your rubber gloves. So like these are just disposable rubber gloves you see me wearing here, but really if you're going to use a lot of the acetone, you have to get into the heavier rubber gloves, otherwise you just get destroyed. we did end up going over this with 2 layers. I'm only showing you the initial layer here before we went ahead and we started to fair everything out. And again, you know, like I had showed you one of the previous videos, those hard edges are the toughest to try to fair. They really, I mean, it's not that thick, but it really does stick out. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll lay that out, and then we'll go over it with some chop strand just to try to smooth it out a little bit. That's what we did on these. And again, every place we put a fillet, we covered it up with the fiberglass. That fiberglass is really what's going to give you your strength and your attachment to the floor. You know, the plywood that we used to build these seats out of was only 3/4 of an inch thick. So there was only 3/4 of an inch of plywood that was even touching that bedding compound to make our bond. So that's not very much. But once we went ahead and we cut these patches in for our tabbing, yeah, you can see we had a good 4 inches each way on the going up the seat as well as going onto the floor. And it's always fun scooting around on the freshly sanded fiberglass. But like I said, you know, you get to a point when you're working with this stuff where it really doesn't bother you as much as it does initially. Once we got all the tabbing done, we're actually able to start to do some fairing. Now our fairing compound is basically mixed up like the peanut butter. We don't mix it to that consistency. We keep it a little bit wetter. So there's some Capasol in here. This has got a lot more glass bead in it because this is where we're going to be sanding. Now, I have a lot of experience with sheetrock, so I kind of treated this like you would a joint in sheetrock, is the way I looked at it. And so we went over. I tried to keep it as thin as possible, which could be good, could be bad. Maybe if I left it a little thicker, I wouldn't have had to put as many coats on it. But I did keep it pretty thin. I was looking to fill in all the low spots. So I did have to give it a couple coats of this. The first coat, you know, it had no wax in it because we knew we were going to have to go over it again. And then our second coat, we actually did add wax to that so that would go ahead and cure up, and we were able to sand it. So once we did this twice, we went over it and we sanded it. Then we were able to take a look and see where our additional low spots were, because there were still low spots because I was doing it so thin. So we had to go over it again, but we eventually got it pretty smooth, and it worked out pretty good. What I'm doing here is I'm just trying to fill everything in and really get the joints. You can see here there's it looks like it's maybe 8 inches, an 8-inch strip. What that actually is that's where the two sheets are laying on top of each other. Like I said, if I was to do this again, I probably wouldn't do it like this. I would have probably just butted them up and went over it with the next layer. It would have kept everything a lot smoother. By doing it this way, I had to do a lot more fairing. So we did leave it thicker there because, again, we had that cut edge from where we cut the matting. You can see how it fills in as we go over it. And how thick you lay this is really up to you. Yeah, like I said, I did it thinner. I probably would have done it a little thicker if I was to do it again. But the problem with doing it thicker is you're going to end up with a little more waves to it. So we were keeping it, by doing it this way, as flat as the fiberglass was on the plywood. All right, that's about it for the fairing. Our next video, we're going to show you what we did with the back seat. You know, the back seat, originally we were going to just screw it down and caulk it in, because the railing has a bolt which ended up being right on the support for the seat. We did find a workaround a little bit for that, so we'll show you that in the next video. And thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time. Thanks.